Sky News Newsday host Tom Connell takes a look at the latest polling in key battleground seats.
Most of the opinion polls we look at in Australia are a nationwide snapshot, so they are imperfect in terms of how elections play out, in particular this election, given very different experiences of COVID-19. This week we have YouGov analysis of all 151 seats broken down, and a caveat on this, of course, this type of analysis, blending of polling data, if you like, hasn't been done before in Australia. It did predict the result in the UK in 2017. So it's interesting to look at some of the surprises this has thrown up. In an overall sense, it has Labor getting about 80 seats, possibly more, possibly fewer, but in a majority. But it's some of the individual surprises I want to go through today. So let's have a look, starting with South East Queensland. And a bit of a surprise here, beginning with Brisbane. We're seeing a big drop in the vote of Trevor Evans, bringing this seat into play. What's a little bit surprising is how close together Labor and the Greens are. What you see, because we're excluding parties from the bottom up, is that the Labor would need to at least get a 50-50 split on those preferences to make sure it stays ahead of the Greens. If it doesn't and things are tight, it's a Greens-Liberal contest, and that could actually help the Liberal Party in this particular contest. Throwing this over to two-party preferred then and how they have put the margins here. Remember, this was 4.9% to Trevor Evans previously, and as you can see on two-party preferred, it's now splitting heavily in favour of Labor. So, if the Greens do sneak ahead though, if that primary is slightly out, it would be a much closer contest with Trevor Evans. So that's interesting to note there. In the seat of Ryan, let's look at that primary vote, also South East Queensland neighbouring. This is where you see a better vote for Julian Simmonds that puts him in a better situation, but also Labor and the Greens very close together. And when we're looking at this other, that's 6% there, that includes Animal Justice and Australian Progressives. In other words, the sort of voters that might give the Greens their preference ahead of Labor. So in this seat in particular, there's a strong chance, at least on these numbers, you could see the Greens ahead of Labor. Now, the two-party preferred that has been thrown from that contest on these numbers by YouGov still has Labor as the other party, but it is worth noting that it could be the Greens. In this case, it's 50-50. If it were to be the Greens, again, the way preference flows work, you would expect Greens voters to give a big advantage to Labor. Labor not as big an advantage to Liberal. In other words, if the Greens finish second on that primary, you'd actually expect Julian Simmonds to have the advantage. So could there be a surprise for the Greens in South East Queensland? We will see. But will it actually advantage the Liberal Party? That's a possibility. Looking elsewhere in Queensland, and this is going to tell the story a lot, I think, in the north of Queensland, we're seeing here 38% down to 33% for Colin Boyce. He's taking over the previous member for the Nationals, Ken O'Dowd there. ALP, though, on 32, so we're seeing them go up 4%. So a transfer of 4 to 5% there. What this story tells you is the Nationals need preferences, but they get a pretty strong flow generally from One Nation and also from UAP, which this effectively is, and it has them ahead. Remember that margin, 8.7%. Let's look at it two-party preferred, and this is going to be a bit of a story of the northern parts of Queensland and central Queensland that will see a swing towards Labor, but not enough. So 8.7 was the margin, 54-46. So they've closed half the gap, but they're not going to get there. I think that's going to happen quite a lot in Queensland, a swing towards Labor, but not enough. Tasmania's looming is quite interesting as well, and a couple of seats we'll look at there. First of all, Bass. What's interesting about this is you're seeing a drop in the Liberal Party vote of about 3%, but so far, Labor not picking much of it up. Jackie Lambie's party down here is the 10% of the other. The Jackie Lambie network is going to have a significant impact right here because just on first blush there, you get Labor getting up to about 45% or so with help from the Greens. How does the rest of the vote split in terms of Liberal versus Labor is going to be key. One Nation and UAP will help the Liberal Party somewhat, but it comes down to the Jackie Lambie network. So as we throw that Bass result to two-party preferred and see how that's going to play out, at the moment at least, this does have the government in trouble in the seat of Bass. So that Jackie Lambie network could possibly get Labor over the line there, 51%. We've heard a lot about UAP and One Nation. Jackie Lambie could be the kingmaker there. The seat of Braddon also in Tasmania as well. The interesting thing about Braddon is 38-32 last time, so this vote is very similar. So what you're seeing is the vote growing there for the Jackie Lambie network. And again, what impact will that have on Braddon? In Braddon, we've got Craig Breakey last time, who was a Conservative independent who's not there this time. So Jackie Lambie's picking a lot of that vote up. Where is it going? 3.1% the margin, remember, on two-party preferred. How that all plays out with two similar primaries previously from Liberal and Labor is that at the moment we're saying on those margins, slight advantage to Gavin Pearce. It was from 3.1%. But given quite a large non-primary vote there from the majors, it would be in play. So that that preference flow wouldn't need to change much for that to be quite an interesting seat. Then we get to some teal candidates. Let's look at this. So Kooyong, the seat of Josh Frydenberg. Remember, he was up just below 50% last time, so barely needed preferences. A huge drop in his vote. Greens at 11%, and this is independents, including Monique Ryan. So most of that vote is Monique Ryan. One interesting thing to note is the fact that Labor plays dead in this seat and how that all works out, because if Labor got up to 25, 26% and Monique Ryan dropped a bit, and you saw Labor finish ahead of Monique Ryan, they wouldn't be a chance of taking the seat. So this is part of Labor's ploy here. They play dead. Historically, they have polled more than 20% primary before in the seat of Kooyong. They don't want to do that this time because they know they can't win the seat. So how that comes out two-party preferred at the moment, remember, it was a 6.4% margin. We're seeing a win for Monique Ryan because she's finishing ahead of Labor and because she's better able to harness that progressive vote, including from the Greens, in that particular seat. So that's the race in terms of Kooyong. North Sydney, we're seeing a different contest, and it is a different type of seat. But look, we've got Labor ahead this time of Kylie Tink. 30% Labor. Kylie Tink will never make that up, so Labor finishes second. The advantage for Trent Zimmerman, who's lost a lot of his vote here, he's 38%. He was ahead last time. He was above 50% just on primary. The advantage for him is Labor don't sweep up preferences as well from the rest of the candidates compared to what Kylie Tink would do if she were in second spot. But Labor can't just run dead here because they know this seat doesn't suit independents as much. It's further west than the other, if you like, teal candidates they're running. So when this looks out on a two-party preferred basis, because Catherine Renshaw is the one on 30 and not the independent, that's better news for Trent Zimmerman, who on these numbers would lose a lot of his vote but managed to stay ahead, albeit a very close contest and closer than previously would have been thought. Boothby, another one. So let's look at a couple of seats that Labor's a very strong chance of gaining. 1.4% is the margin. And again, 37% is the Liberal primary vote there. Last time around, 45%. So they're dropping a huge amount of it. Labor, how much is it picking up? It goes from 35 to 38, so not necessarily a lot. So what's happening? Jo Dyer is running. She's the 11%, and her voters are going to help Labor. Even on a 50-50 basis, they'll help Labor as much as they help the Liberal Party. And the key for Labor is getting help from the Greens. And they'll get 8%, 9%, give or take on that. It gets them to 47, and it means all they need is an equal split from Jo Dyer, and they're easily over the line. So looking at two-party preferred on Boothby on those numbers, and you see Labor, after all the promise of various elections, finally getting over the line. This is the projection. I'm not saying it will happen, but this is the projection on those particular primaries. And the final one's Swan. So a few close contests. We usually see when there's a big swing that's predicted at the moment, some contests swinging in a huge way, and that's what we're seeing in Swan. Last time around, 45% for the Liberal Party. We've got a new attempted member for Liberal, Kristy McSweeney. She'd lose more than 10% on primary, and crucially, Labor picking up 9%. So what you're seeing is a pretty neat transfer from the Liberal Party to the ALP. They don't have to rely on any preferences beyond the Greens, and there you see it, 57-43. So that would be that contest two-party preferred. So this polling, it's unlikely to be exactly accurate. This is very specific polling in a whole lot of seats across the country, but it's worth looking at some of those different contests, how they might play out, some of the surprises we might see in South East Queensland, and the sort of seats you will see, the Labor Party having to rely on preferences, and where they'll just need help from the Greens. And that the higher their primary is, the more they'll just need some help from the Greens to win enough seats to get a majority government.